Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, the Moth Maker, and in today's video, I'll be talking about the history of trench warfare. I won't waste your time. Without further ado, let's get in. Trench warfare is typically associated with World War I and World War II, but it predates those by a long time. First being written down in ancient history, being used by the Romans in 530 AD in the Battle of Dara, which was a part of the Iberian War, and the Romans were led by General Belisarius. But it is more likely than not that trench warfare has been used long before that written example. And another ancient example is in 627 AD, when the Muslims in the Quraysh were fighting, and the Muslims defended themselves by building a trench in the self-titled Battle of the Trench. But as we head out of ancient times, we head into medieval times, with examples being during the Piedmontese Civil War, where on May 12th, 1640, the French who captured the west bank of a river were gaining control of a bridge connecting the two banks of the river, and decided to advance on enemy trenches. But the French were repelled twice until they eventually broke through the trenches line, and the defenders were forced to leave and flee amongst the civilian populace and flee to the local Catholic Church. But as time progressed, trench warfare started growing and expanding out of its medieval and ancient infancy, which leads us into
way down south in the land of traitors, rattlesnakes and alligators. Right away, come away.
As we reach early modern warfare, field works begin to be used to block possible lines of advance, with an example of such being the lines of Stolhofen during the War of Spanish Succession. And the lines were earthworks built for an army of the Holy Roman Empire to protect the Spanish from the newly erected French fortress nearby. There are also the lines of Weissenberg, lines of Ne Plus Ultra, and lines of Torres Vedras, for example, as of earthworks being used and built for trenches to help block lines of enemy advance. As we continue, though, we begin to reach the Industrial Revolution, with many more examples of trench warfare during this time, due to the guns growing much more efficient, with an example being during the New Zealand Wars, which take place during 1845 to 1873. And the war was between the colonial New Zealand government and the groups of Maori tribal people. But during the war, the Maori people utilized a trench and bunker system, which they specially called the Pa. And Pa, these were bunkers and trenches covered with loose bunches of flax, and every time a bullet shot through the Maori Pa, they would simply immediately repair it. And this also leads us into the Crimean War, which took place from 1853 to 1856, which also saw uses as trenches. And even in the American Civil War, trenches were used by the Confederate and Union sides. They were used more specifically on sieges, such as the Siege of Vicksburg, which, after the Union took over the city of Vicksburg, it split the Mississippi in half, allowing the Union to effectively kill off the Confederacy, and the Siege of Petersburg, which saw the very first ever use of the rapid-fire Gatling gun by the Union side, which was one of the first rapid-fire firearms, and this would lead to the development of more rapid firearms, which would become a staple of trench warfare. And trenches were also used in the Paraguayan War, Second Anglo-Boer War, and the Russo-Japanese War, which would be important because it was the last major conflict to have trenches before the advent of World War I. And leading out of that, it's time for By World War I, firearms were much more advanced, and it was realized that a person hiding behind cover in a defensive position could easily take down multiple attackers before they themselves will be taken down. And digging within a position was already a common practice by the start of the war in 1914. So trench warfare also especially intensified when on the front of Belgium and France, both sides concentrated on breaking up enemy attacks and defending their own troops, rather than fully pushing forward and attacking the enemy. So as troops hunkered down, they brought bigger guns and much larger artillery, leading to the creation of the no man's land, which was the space between two opposing trenches where if you went up, odds are you'd be shot dead almost instantly. And as trenches became more commonplace, it became harder to infiltrate them. But all this did was simply lead to the creation of newer, better, and more interesting ways of infiltration. One of which being the German stormtroopers, who would rush forward into no man's land, find cover, and then provide covering fire for this next small group to make it over. And they would rinse and repeat this process over and over. And another way to circumvent trenches was mining under the enemy lines and then blowing up explosives to destroy trenches. So, countermining to find and destroy these tunnels also became an integral part of trench warfare. Another thing we must talk about with trench warfare is gas. Poison gas is very, very important to trench warfare, more specifically in World War I, because of just how deadly it was in its ability to just completely circumvent trench warfare. Because all it took was gas shells or anything of that like to go into the trench and poison all the troops, which would allow none of the attackers or defenders doing it to really face heavy casualties. And one more way of circumventing trenches was tanks, which tanks could easily surmount the many things that made it hard to get into an enemy trench, such as barbed wire, and they could face a decent amount of heavy enemy fire before finally being taken out, making them very useful for trench warfare. But they only saw very little use in World War I due to just how newly they were developed. But with World War I out of the way, we need to talk about Of course, as we all know, after World War I, World War II occurred, and with it, trench warfare occurred again, with the French already having a pre-built line that they were making decades in advance, called the Maginot Line. Forgive me if I mispronounce that, I don't know this, which was an extremely advanced trench system with concrete, iron, and steel fortresses along with retractable turrets, which would force an invading Germany, or anyone invading from that side, to fight them through Belgium, which would help to keep the fighting off of French soil. And that's exactly what happened when Germany invaded Belgium. But they got this shock on France because they invaded through a very forested region of Belgium and France to circumvent most of France's defenses. And they also focused on very certain points on the Maginot Line with varying degrees of success. But as World War II progressed, there was a return of mobile warfare, which really put a backseat on the emphasis of trench warfare, because defenders simply started lacking the time to build these massive installments. But throughout World War II, on the European and African fronts, trench warfare still persisted and advanced throughout. But another specific area of World War II with trenches I want to look at quickly is the Japanese. And the Japanese in the Pacific Front created these giant labyrinths underground, which would have massive tunnels, and they could slow down Allied troops and provide the Japanese a good advantage. But also post-World War II, trenches saw use during the Gulf War, Korean War, and even into the modern day with the Russian-Ukrainian War. But as time progressed, even if still used, it's taken much more of a backseat, as war has become a lot closer in range, but also a lot more detached. Due to the development of drone warfare, drone strikes, airstrikes, and all that, war has simply just become less physical. Countries now will just take their devices and pit them against each other, and soon, more likely than not, trench warfare will become a thing of the past, which is arguably a good thing. Trench warfare also had a great impact on culture though, with it being turned into a physical representation of war's futility at times, because both sides fight for very little gain, stuck at an almost constant stalemate. And it's also become akin to slaughter due to images of people throwing themselves over the trenches lines, only to be mowed down by heavy machine gun fire. But that was a very quick and brief history of trench warfare. Thank you for watching. If this video gets like 10 likes, then I'll make another history video, even though I probably won't make one anyway. But like, and maybe also toss me a little subscribe. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the outro song. Hey everybody, this is my outro song. I hope that you do sing along. I'm the Moth Maker, and I make content. Please give me money. I need money. Please subscribe. I don't have a dime. I have really, really bad rhymes. Please subscribe. This is the outro song. The outro song. The outro song. This is the Moth Maker outro song. Please subscribe. I don't have a dime. If you give me a little bit of your time, maybe subscribe and give me a dime. A dime, a dime, a dime, a rhyme. I got bars from Mars. Girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider. Boys go to Mars to get more bars. That's what I'm saying. My name's not Lars. My name is Mothmaker, and I take time to make these videos, and I spit bars, rhymes, and hymes, and lots of things. So please subscribe and have a good time. Bye.